capitalism is now
When we last spoke, it was in the middle of the left's fight over this idea of force the vote. And while some people are going to cringe that I am, yes, still talking about it a year later, the reason why so many on the left were so viscerally committed to this was because it was one of the few moments where a very small number of House members could actually exert sincere power, not just the kind of begging Biden to do something, but the ability to say, I'm going to withhold something that the party wants and needs, Nancy Pelosi's speakership, over some really hardcore concessions that Nancy Pelosi has in her personal power to extend, like whether it's a vote on Medicare for all, whether it's certain committee appointments that they crowed were going to come because of playing nice. Playing nice, begging didn't actually get them the results that they claimed playing nice was going to get. So now we have kind of proof positive. A lot of us at that moment were like, we're going to be disappointed, because that was in some ways the lowest the stakes were ever going to be in terms of the trade-off between being able to give things to your constituents, do things for your constituents, and like risking it for something bigger, right? The only downside is Nancy Pelosi isn't Speaker of the House. Who cares? So what, right? It's not like, okay, I hold up the Build Back Better bill and people don't get, $2,000 checks, or they don't get child tax credits, or whatever it is, right? At this point, the risks were so low, and the progressives' unwillingness to do it really was a bad omen for a lot of people on the left. And over the course of the last year, it feels, and I take no joy in this, but it feels like we were proven aggressively right. And so I want to hear what your view of this is, because my concern is that going into midterms, going into 2024, all of this institutional memory of how right the left was at the very beginning, or at least some parts of the left were at the very beginning, it's going to go out the window. And we're going to get a lot of thought leaders who command a lot of respect, including Professor Chomsky, saying again, despite all of the evidence that Joe Biden hasn't done what was necessary to address the climate crisis and myriad other crises, that Trump is worse. It's the lesser of two evils. You got to fall in line. How do we break out of that dynamic?
I don't know, but again, that's the big question. But what I will tell you my conclusion. But I still think, even if we skeptics were proven right, it was nonetheless not a mistake to give Biden and people around him a chance. Because now nobody can accuse us of being that kind of dogmatic sectarian leftist who just comfortably, like you and me, with all the books and wait for the big revolution, but just denounce all proposals. No, we acted honestly. We played we who said, okay, allow Biden, if he can, to do something good. We gave him a chance. And as you beautifully said, we are not now enthusiastic that we were proven right, that Democrats didn't immediately. But it's very important, if we want in the long term to achieve, I don't know what, anything, that we are not perceived as these usual academic radicals who are very quick to denounce every measure as a compromise. No, we should. Now, this will shock you. You know that I like this almost perverse line, but I think I'm correct. In this crazy situation in which we are today, we are the moderate common sense realists. The measures that we should insist on this, those in power are playing with our fate. They are crazy.
That's true. That's true. But it is also
something
true.
Bothers you, strike back.
Regardless of how measured we are in our early critiques, regardless of how much we frame the issues as we want Joe Biden just to fill his campaign promises. I'm not rooting against Biden, right? That's the posture that I took. I'm not rooting for Biden to fail. I'm rooting for him to succeed. I'm warning him as what's going to happen down the pike. Regardless of the moderation of my own tone, I am still, and people who took this approach are still characterized as radicals. And at the same time, I would argue the fact that no one out there is speaking more radically and truthfully about what's going on and willing to say this is actually corruption afoot, that Joe Biden, of course, is not going to do the right thing. He hired Steve Ricchetti, a former oil lobbyist, as his senior advisor. He's got Cedric Richardson from the most polluted district in America as a senior advisor. We know what this game is. He told in that, he said in the leaked meeting to a bunch of donors, nothing would fundamentally change. Like, the fact that there were that level of tone, that level of analysis wasn't a bigger part of the conversation, enabled the corporate media to get away for the last 10 months with pretending like Biden was going to be something he wasn't. And only now people are reaching out to me for interviews talking about, oh, well, what could he do now? What should the left say? I'm like, where were you 6 months ago when you were writing screeds about how Biden was going to be the next FDR and casting people like myself as completely unreasonable, disgruntled Bernie bros? There's a time and a place for this kind of criticism, and now it's all too late. And this is what happens. The media will open itself up to the kind of criticism that is necessary after the fact.
I will maybe appear too much of a conformist for you, but my counterpoint would have been, not even counterpoint, I agree with you. Did we have a choice? Unfortunately, but correct me immediately if I'm wrong. As I put it cynically, you can even correct me if I am right, But don't you think that not doing this, not pretend to, even if we know how it will come out, not to pretend to give Biden a chance, wouldn't change anything? We would just not only appear as sectarians who even wanted Biden to fail, it would even be possible to blame us. That you see, you contributed to this, you were too tough, and so on and so on.
But that's the thing.
I think we never, as you pointed out nicely, we just say, okay, he's saying some things which in present desperate constellation are not totally bad. Let's see what he will do. We never crossed that fateful line into AOC, like.
I agree with you, and that's why
choice? Being totally skeptical from the beginning.
I did it right. Like I did the thing that you're arguing for. So obviously, on some level, I thought that was the best approach. I guess my frustration is that there is no lefter flank. I don't think that me and all of my bourgeois sensibilities should be anywhere close to the left flank of discourse happening in this country. And it frustrates me that there aren't people somewhere. I have a certain level of, for lack of a better word, like political credibility that I think is valuable on its own that I want to protect. But somebody somewhere, it seems to me, should be making the much harder line argument, especially members of the press who have access to people like Jen Psaki, who recently caused another little firestorm over student loan debt. This is not something that's going away because, again, to your point, this is something that was a Biden campaign promise, and then in the left, in all of its measured reasonableness, hasn't been broadly saying, okay, Joe Biden cancel all student debt. We all know he never promised that, but he did promise to cancel $10,000 for everybody and full debt cancellation for everybody who makes $125,000 under $125,000 a year and went to a public university. that has been memory hold. Nobody's talking about that in the public sphere. And unfortunately, the press secretary is able to get up and get away with Joe Biden not fulfilling that very basic campaign promise and instead turning student loan payments back on in an election year at the same time that the child tax credits are ending.
Yeah.
And she gets away with it because reporters refuse to ask her. They assume it. They don't refuse to assume in the question that Biden has the authority to cancel student debt, which of course he does. So Jen Psaki can get away with saying for months, "Oh, we're waiting for an advisory letter." And then when the advisory letter got leaked, entirely redacted, by the way, but the existence of the letter has existed since April. Then the pivot was to, oh, well, there's no bill on my desk. A bill on your desk, the whole point of this is that it's something you can do by executive order. But because the questions aren't framed as such, because the questions aren't framed in a more adversarial, visceral way, she will probably get away with this until February 1st, at which point we will all be paying our debts again, unless there is a debt strike.
Yeah.
And she'll be saying, oh, well, we can't reverse it. It's already a done deal. And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that sometimes I think we don't realize that another level of discourse and aggression is necessary until it's too late. And everyone thinks they can do this consensus building and even though I'm an outsider, even though so many of us in the left media are outsiders, we're still behaving as though we're playing an inside game like we are AOC.
No, I agree with you, and I will add here, I think we will agree 2 points concerning all this. First, a more general critical point. Which in today's situation, where I really think, I don't want to take too much of your time by this, I've written a short text, I forgot where it was published, but you know what's happening today? I really think that it's not a dream. There is on the horizon clearly a war either in Europe around Ukraine and in the Far East, Taiwan, China. And that's another question. I also have to criticize Putin, criticize the Chinese. I list all the problematic things China is doing, this new wave of repression, nationalist rhetorics, boosting the military. It's very interesting to see. I just saw some clips. China just put on the market their biggest movie hit. It earned in China itself almost 1 billion, which celebrates a foreign intervention of China into North Korea and so on. But I'm not just blaming China or Putin. You know where Biden totally follows Trump and goes even further in his boycott of China, in his anti-Chinese policy? In what sense? I think a very simple analysis. United States still have a more or less monopoly on software, hardware, digital space, all those companies and so on. And it wants absolutely to retain this monopoly. Europe can do it, nobody else. China is the only competitor. I find this so horrible, how the whole situation is slowly, I will not bore you again with all the details, but some of the details are fascinating. It's how, on the one hand, China is right to feel encircled more and more. On the other hand, China is getting ready. Like, I have a friend in China with whom I communicate, and he sends me emails through foreign links. He's afraid things are censored there. But you know that regularly now in Chinese military journals, who are still not secret journals, public debate of how military should be organized in China, they regularly mention that United States has one advantage with regard to China. They always were engaged in small wars, like small, not total wars like Afghanistan, Iraq, to train their army in real battle experience, while Chinese didn't. The last was that short intervention 40 years ago, or when it didn't work well into Vietnam to punish it for invading Cambodia. So they claim we need a real battle. We need a small war and all other symptoms. And that very mysterious, this is things that made me afraid. Did you notice this? news. It was not secret. It was in all the media in China. The government called on ordinary people, families, that in view of, they didn't specify a possible chaos, troubles, that every family should gather at home, provide themselves with food supplies for at least 2 months. There are dark things, but my point is, I'm not simply blaming China here. I think the whole situation, and even with Ukraine, where the thing appears to be clear, like Putin wants to expand. But it's not as simple as that, because I remember, you are too young, I'm unfortunately not, how when Soviet Union fell apart, there was a clear deal between Russia and the West. Russia, Yeltsin at that point, accepts the disintegration of Soviet Union into autonomous, fully sovereign republics on condition that the West solemnly promised that none of these new states will join NATO. The West is breaking this promise also. So and now this is what really disappoints me. One would have thought, that the logic would be, my God, we are now fighting epidemic and then global warming, at least wars and this then. No. Usually we have a stupid saying in Slovene, when the devil has children young, he usually had a lot of them in one small period. No, it's as if that precisely because we are in such a global crisis, there is even a greater danger of war, and this makes me pessimist. But back to your point. Biden and so on. What I still don't see is, okay, I'll put it like this so that I don't get confused. Nonetheless, don't be all in all too much of a pessimist. I begin with this, then I will make the pessimist conclusion. Don't you think that the fact that we have now, even have this debate, we have a little bit, at least, more serious left, which is limited, but nonetheless a political agent. And we can debate, should we strategically support some of things Biden is doing, others not, means that things are moving slowly somewhere.
But that's not quite the debate. Slava, I don't feel like there's anybody on the left who's ever really been antagonistic to anything on Biden's agenda. There is nobody, and this is part of my point. Maybe there should be someone who was kind of radically out there rooting for Biden to fail, but on the whole, everyone would be, there are so many people on the left who would be the first to stand in line and bend the knee and congratulate the guy for doing the bare minimum. And he won't even do what he has professed he would do. And the left is being still blamed, to your earlier point, for any failure. The left will be blamed for the losses in 2022. Claire McCaskill and all of them are already testing their excuses for how somehow the completely neutered and non-existent left is going to be to blame for this. And so what do we have to show for our restraint?
I see your point, and I will even go further. Now comes my pessimist conclusion. That as you were justified to point out, what I fear is that in 2024, it will be the same emotional as it were blackmail. They will say, yes, Biden didn't do it all, but listen, do you want Trump back? And we will be blackmailed into again play. And I'm aware of this. That's why, you remember, I was almost cursed by Chomsky and all of them when I said maybe it's better for the left for Trump to win. I wouldn't say this again in 2024 because who knows what. I think that I'm much more of a pessimist in the sense that not only in United States but all around, that there are simply signs that a basic social pact in the sense of a civil order is slowly disintegrating, that this is a very speculative thesis, that we are moving into new tribal societies where, isn't it clear that, and I agree here with you, isn't it clear that with Trump people, extreme, all these conspiracy theorists and so on, it's nonsense to say we need a dialogue with them. No, ultimately, somebody will have to win.
Some people would say that the extradition of Julian Assange is evidence that there is an alignment when it comes to some of the most coercive, anti-free speech, fascistic elements that Trump had with Biden. And you've written in your book, how do you put it, that Biden is Trump with a nice face or something along those lines? I don't want to misquote you.
No, I refer to that old ironic idea when progressives in the 60s, 70s were calling for socialism with a human face.
With a human face.
And I say that Biden is Trump with a human face.
Right.
Although, would you agree? Sorry to interrupt. Now, I would say even the opposite, that if we use the term human in the sense of all the vulgarity of everyday manners, when you relax, you get drunk, you are vulgar, it's almost that Trump is Biden with a human face. In Trump, you get all these dirty jokes, vulgarity. Biden is just more controlled. Everything is controlled. He is, and so. But nonetheless, I'm a little bit here more optimist than you. I think that if the left should draw this conclusion, of course, that to really not bring a change, but at least keep the space open for the change which is needed, that it cannot be done within the hegemonic political space, Democrats, Republicans, and so on, that we have to step out somehow. But it's nonetheless important how to do this. That's my obsession.
Well, how do we do that? Because that is also my obsession as well. Because it's not.
Here comes. Okay, we should do everything. I was clear here. I support sincerely, not because some calculations. I support. That's incidentally, I think it's in this book, my favorite moment where I unite philosophy with everyday political analysis. Why Black Lives Matter are more universal than all lives matter. All lives matter appear universal, but they are a fake, because this all is already overdetermined by white standards and so on. To be universal today, you have to say Black Lives Matter, because they are, I even believe here in the deep lesson of so-called, how are they called, Afro-pessimists and so on. Is this Afro-pessimist? Those guys who claim that anti-black racism is not the same as other racism, it's at a more basic level. But don't you think that if we want our speech to have any effect, now I will expose myself, you should attack me, that if we want our speech to have any effect, we should endlessly repeat this point, that first, what we want are not some eccentric remarks, communism, new communist party, whatever. We just basically want to take seriously what those in power are forced under pressure of circumstances to announce as their goals. For example, which was for me mega fiasco, take the Glasgow conference. What they were saying there, it's true. It was the scandal now with Omicron, which becomes clear. The scandal is triple. First, in some European countries, they have now even too many vaccines, and since their, date of use is over, they are destroying them. Nobody thought, at least that before the date was reached, let's ship them quickly to third world countries. There was no serious cooperation. Third thing, they are saying this, those in power. What about free licensing, no copyright for the vaccines? And you can get even a very good logical pro-capitalist even justification for this, because as we know, the private corporations, pharmaceutical, got billions of dollars of state support for developing vaccine. Why don't they owe something society? They will still earn enough and so on and so on. So what I would have done is this too compromising for you, is to insist we are not some madman importing some crazy radical notion. Look, you are admitting that this is needed. Not to mention even global warming. People know there has to be international cooperation, there will be food crisis and so on. We should emphasize that we are not radical madmen. We address common sense.
Right. And I'm with you. And that's what we've all been doing. And look what happened. Somebody asked recently, Jen Psaki at a press conference, why we can't ship tests to every American. She scoffed and laughed at the idea like it was completely absurd and said, how much would this cost? And when the reporter pointed out that other countries managed to do it all over the world, she says, well, we share the same values and goals. We're just going to go about it differently. Meanwhile, biggest military budget in American history. No one's asking how we're going to pay for it. So my point is not that I disagree with that approach. My point is that we've all been taking that approach and it hasn't been working. And so I want to ask about your optimism, because in your book, you talk about how even the Demos and the Yellow Jackets, the Jaune Vests, there were these moments where they seemed to be having be riding on a real wave of radical potential change. And then there was this moment where they were actually given a voice within Parliament, and in your telling, that effectively neutered or took a lot of the air out of the energy of the movement.
No, the tragical fate for me is Podemos in Spain. You remember 3-4 years ago, hundreds of thousands of people, incredible mobilization. Now they are just one very modest, traditional, but modest social democratic party.
Right.
You know what's okay, let me provoke you further.
Okay.
I say something horrible. So that you will see that I'm not a fake optimist, like let's support Biden, something will come out of it.
Okay.
I think the way we screwed it up, we simply are not yet there desperate enough. I'm not a leftist fanatic like some of my leftist friends, I will not name them, even claim the only thing would be to maybe even provoke some catastrophe, explode an atomic and nuclear plant or whatever. No, but obviously, and I don't worry that this will not happen. Obviously, you know what's the problem? Sorry that I jumped. The problem is that in old Marxist way, I'm still basically a Marxist, but a critical one. In the old Marxist way, we were used to trust history. History is on our side, moving in progress and so on. No, I don't think so. I think that the global development today goes towards a suicidal catastrophe. And we have to act in a voluntarist way. By voluntarist, I mean we just have to do something to prevent a catastrophe. I always quote that Walter Benjamin. The task of the progressive forces today, it's not to ride the train of history, but to pull the, brake, the urgency.
So what's pulling the brake? Have you been following any of the third-party movements, the Andrew Yang deciding to put his energy behind starting a third party and focusing on ranked choice voting and ballot initiatives? What do you make of that?
You know what? I was always skeptical about this, like Podemos, social movements and so on. But again, I don't know enough about the United States, but we even in Slovenia and in other European countries, now, apart from the official corrupted left, which is no left, our version of Biden's and so on, there is an incredible awakening of, I don't like this name, is so much misused, but civil society. Civil society can also be extremely corrupted. Fascism began as a civil society movement. But things can, for example, in Slovenia, the government wanted to change the law regulating where on the shores of rivers and sea can you build can you construct new buildings? Why? It would be a catastrophe. It would be very profitable, but a catastrophe for clean water and so on and so on. You know what happened? Everybody thought this will be 10, 20,000 people. It was incredible. It was 70, 80% of the people voted, the highest turnout. It was just a referendum, and the government lost by around 85% against. Now, my fear is that this will remain one issue, points of mobilization. The big task is to politicize them in some way, like to find a way to retain. This is where Syriza in Greece failed. The moment after the compromise with EU that they took power, they destroyed their entire civil society base, all those autonomous non-governmental organizations. Here I see, maybe I'm too optimistic, but there are signs that this is possible. And some of these organizations, they are moving in this direction, you know, in the sense that they don't want just to become another party, but they want to influence the elections. There are now a couple of groups in Slovenia which are very strong locally, and they decided to avoid totally this big debate, not against global warming, but they are asking the parties, are you for or against a new nuclear plant? What is a minimal wage and so on? All these demands, they are just moving to concrete topics, and this mobilizes people. So I am not afraid that nothing will happen. My God, look what's happening already in the United States. Don't you think that at a certain point, with pandemic and even more with global warming and all these catastrophes up and down, people will be fed up. And at that point, maybe we can.
Yeah, I think that people are already fed up. And I think that when you talk about politicizing issues, the right is doing a very good job of it.
That's the problem. That will be the big problem.
COVID in particular, I think we're only seeing the beginning of the extent to which this is the litmus test for conservative candidates. We recently did an episode on a TV personality named Dr. Oz, who's running for Senate in Pennsylvania, largely charting a new path forward somewhere between COVID skepticism and vaccine, COVID skepticism and kind of a pharmaceutical skepticism, which I think a lot of Americans across the aisle feel. And so liberals identifying themselves so strongly with the "I believe in science, don't question me, Dr. Fauci is king" message forecloses, I think, a lot of really organic and sincere skepticism of the corporate nature of the pharmaceutical industry and the exploitative history of it that everyone understands and are being gaslit now about, because to acknowledge that is in some ways to be seen as being an anti-vaxxer or siding with the right. Meanwhile, the right is now given this huge opportunity to take a kind of pseudo, anti-corporate, pseudo-populist posture that also neatly dovetails with the kind of anti-vax sentiment that is already existing on the right. And there's no end to how many benefits that's going to pay off. But to your point in the book, it does feel like there are three parties. There's a neoliberal center. Yeah. There's a leftist small little flint of a fragment, and there is an alignment between the far right and the center right in a way that makes it inordinately more powerful. And that is why there's so much focus and why I'm so obsessed with the idea that there needs to be a more serious conversation had about how to budge the neoliberal left and to co-opt the neoliberal left the way that the far right had managed to do to the neoliberal right. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.
is outraged by Pelosi defending her insider trading and corruption. Take a look at this clip.
Members of Congress and their spouses be banned from trading individual stocks while serving in Congress.
No, I don't know to this second one. This is a free market and people, we are a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that.
I got to talk about this and bring in Andrew Ross Sorkin, co-anchor of Squawk Box and founder of the New York Times Deal Book. Andrew, you got to walk me through this. When you're the CEO of a publicly traded company, there are all sorts of restrictions on what you can do. When you work in an investment bank, when you work as an investor, so many restrictions when it comes to personal investments. But these people, lawmakers, these are policymakers, policies that directly influence the way business is done all over the country. How is this even remotely legal?
This was one of the most disappointing and maybe, to put it even less politely, disgraceful comments and views I have heard espoused on this issue, and surprising given Pelosi's views on many other issues. We have insider trading laws for a reason. CEOs, executives cannot trade. Members of the Federal Reserve now cannot trade. And yet we are allowing our politicians who do have access to inside information. They are often briefed regularly about all sorts of things that are about to happen, and that they have a meaningful influence on what is about to happen, and they are trading. To the extent that politicians should want the public to trust them, this undermines every bit of trust. It goes to every worst expectation of corruption. And it's not even expectation, it's real.
This isn't about free markets. This is about having privileged information and using it to your own personal advantage. But let's talk about, even if you agree that the current laws make sense, that you should be able to buy and sell stock, the penalties are a joke. You can make tens of millions of dollars with privileged information. And what's going to happen? You're going to get fined $200.
Nothing.
Wow. That is surprising. That is surprising. MSNBC going after Nancy Pelosi. That's how much she crossed the line here. They brought up an interesting point. You know, the Fed had a scandal recently about trading stocks, and then they immediately banned trading stocks. Shock, right? Apparently CEOs have rules as well. I actually was unaware of that. So what's happening here is they're like, look, other elites have rules and regulations that are more stringent. So this is like spitting in our face, what Nancy Pelosi said here. That's all correct. That's all correct. I mean, I would ban them today from owning stocks. I would ban the revolving door. If you're going to be a public servant, you can only be a public servant. You can't then cash in as a lobbyist or whatever afterwards. You can't serve Big Pharma and then when you leave D.C., go get paid $1 million from Big Pharma to be an advisor or whatever. Nope. If you're a public servant, you're a public servant. That's it. Because clearly you have conflicts of interest, you have corruption, and then you have politicians that only serve the interests of industry over constituents. But I will go one step further here. And this is where these people lose the plot. This is a very clear kind of personal conflict of interest and corruption. But in corporate media, they have absolutely nothing to say about the more pervasive form of corruption in D.C., campaign contributions. Because, I mean, don't take my word for it. Go look at the numbers. You have Wall Street, Big Pharma, the health insurance companies, the defense contractors. When a politician, a Republican politician or a Democratic politician runs for office, the corporate wing of the party, they raise almost all of their money from industry, almost all of it. It's very rare that you get any politician on the right or the left that does grassroots fundraising. So they raise money from corporate PACs. The party institutions themselves also raise money from these special interest groups. And that is exactly why we have the debates that we have in Washington, D.C., and it's just tiny little tweaks around the edges. And even if you have a bold proposal, it gets whittled down to 20% of what it was previously. That is all because of the influence of big money. So in other words, they're not having honest ideological disagreements about the direction of the country. They're having disagreements over serving their particular donor set. And so that's why really popular ideas just get stripped, whether it's Medicare expansion, childcare, universal pre-K, elder care, like all these things just get watered down or totally axed because they're not serving the people. If they were serving the people, all these things would already be law. We'd already have universal health care. We'd already have universal background checks on gun purchases. We'd already have free college. We'd already have a $15 minimum wage or higher. If the government actually represented the people, that would be the case. But they don't represent the people. They're representing industry. Look, I use this example all the time, but in the 2020 election in Florida, Donald Trump beat Joe Biden, but also raising the minimum wage won with 60% of the vote. That means a lot of Republicans, average Joe and Jane Republicans, went and voted for Trump and then also voted to raise the minimum wage. How can that be? Well, it's very simple. The population is actually way more economically left than any of the politicians are. Because the average Joe and Jane are not bought off by Walmart and Pfizer and ExxonMobil and all these different companies. So it's great that they're calling this out, and credit to them. And they should ban politicians from owning stocks, absolutely. But don't get it twisted. The worst form of corruption, because it's more pervasive and there's more money involved in it, is campaign contributions. Now, unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled that basically money equals free speech in a number of court decisions over the years. And so whatever rules there are very lax. And so you would need a constitutional amendment to give us public elections, clean elections. And what that means is instead of private funding of elections, you have public funding. So each candidate is allocated a certain amount, and then that's the money they could use to campaign. Or you give the American people a $100 or $200 voucher or whatever, and they get to spend it on whatever politicians they want. That's the idea of a clean election. Do you get the private money out of the system so they actually start representing the people? We can't have that unless and until we have a constitutional amendment. That's one massive problem. But there is a way around all this corruption, but short of taking on the monumental task of a constitutional convention to get the money out of the system. You can have a direct democracy law at a federal level, which allows us, those direct ballot initiatives in the states. So, like, for example, here in New York, years ago, we voted on, should upstate New York be allowed to have casinos? They're lagging economically. They don't have a lot of jobs there. If the voters approve a casino there, then they'll have a casino there. That was one of the direct ballot initiatives. There's been a number, and California has a lot of them. A lot of states have a lot of direct ballot initiatives. Even some conservative states have direct ballot initiatives. The idea of a federal direct ballot initiative law, like a federal direct democracy law, could be that when you go vote for president every 4 years, you also get hit with 5 issues you vote directly on. Imagine all of us, you go vote for president, and then also, as you're voting for president, should we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour? By the way, I bet you would see participation in our democracy massively increase if people got to vote directly on the issues. Should we end the war in Iraq? Should we have a $15 minimum wage? Should we have a universal health care system? And my guess is no matter who wins, Democrat or Republican, usually 80% of the time, the better position wins for the direct ballot initiatives. And sometimes even with massive propaganda on the wrong side, the right side wins. Now, look, about 20% of the time it doesn't. Sometimes the propaganda wins out. But 80-20 is a much better split than what we have right now, which is 95-5. 95% of the time the wrong position wins, 5% of the time the right position wins. 80% on the right side of it, I'll take it. So that's what we need to do. But look, corporate media turning on Nancy Pelosi is not something I saw coming, but what she said was so egregious, even they couldn't handle it. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.
Do you think that racial tensions are being stoked in order to turn ordinary working people against one another? Football legend John Barnes, himself a man of colour, says that the white working class are being unfairly vilified in order to create division. But what do you think? Hello there, you 4.5 million miracles. Thank you for coming together to watch this video together, whoever you are, wherever you're from, however you identify. On my podcast, Under the Skin, available from Luminary, I spoke to John Barnes, the former Watford, Liverpool, England football superstar. He's written a new book about race. It's a fantastic book. The link is in the description if you're interested in reading it. And he talks about the complexity of racial politics from an interesting perspective. He says that many white working class people are unfairly condemned and criticized for arguments that really could be resolved by elite systems changing rather than the conduct of ordinary people changing. It's a very nuanced and complex argument. John Barnes, if you're an American, you will be aware, hit the headlines when he stuck up for Liam Neeson after Liam Neeson's controversial comments, shall we call them, about vengeance and racism that led to Liam Neeson dealing with a lot of public condemnation. John Barnes was a brilliant footballer, but also a brilliant orator with a lot to say on the subject of race, which I think will surprise you, give you a lot to think about, whether you're on the left or the right. I think most of us want to move beyond racism. I think most of us want to find ways of coming together. John Barnes, elsewhere in the conversation, talked about his conversation and his reading of excellent black academics like Kahindi Andrews and his willingness to explore new ideas. I want you to stay to the very end of this video and let me know what you think of it.
The book is called Uncomfortable Truth About Racism because you mentioned race, it's going to sell more books. Let's be honest. But it's really an intersectional book about discrimination and bias. I'm a light-skinned, middle-class Jamaican whose mother's family helped to start the first Jamaican government after independence. Her grandfather was her father, and her uncle were imprisoned by the British for sedition against the crown. That's really because they wanted to be independent. They didn't kill anybody, but they were talking about independence. Then when the first Jamaican government started, they broke away from the Jamaican government to start the first trade unions because they felt that the Jamaican government was too elitist. As much as now it's a black country with a black government, although the government were going to be light, middle skinned, probably even white Jamaicans, they saw that they discriminated against the working class, the black working class. So they started the trade unions. So I was always brought up from a young person growing up in Jamaica until I was 13 with lots of politicians and lots of arguments about what's right for the people. As much as my family were an elite political family, they were on the side of the people and always on the side of the working classes. Now, this has got nothing to do with race because everybody's black, but that is how I then came to differentiate between elite, non-elite, middle class, working class, and then black and white. It's the same thing. It's about discrimination against people who you feel superior to. So then coming to England and then being the son of a diplomat, my father was a colonel in the army. We lived in Highgate. We lived in Hampstead. We lived in Mayfair. My father had a chauffeur. So therefore, as much as I know the black experience as a young black boy in London with my friends who lived in council houses, I didn't experience that.
Yeah.
And then when I became a footballer at 17, I am now once again an elite person. So while there was racist abuse for footballers then, and there was no conversation around this is wrong, there still was some sympathy for us. So as I'm going down the Holloway Road on the coach for Watford versus Arsenal, and it happened to be Arsenal fans. I'm not saying Arsenal fans are more racist than Watford fans or Liverpool fans. This is the way it was. And we were being racially abused, me and Luther on the coach, and bananas were being thrown at the coach, but I'm having a glass of wine and eating lobster. So therefore, how am I affected by that? What I was affected by was as I looked into the crowd on the Holloway Road, I saw average working class black people cowering in shops, hiding around corners so that they don't get abused. And I always felt, who is speaking for them? It's okay speaking for John Barnes. And now here we are 40 years later, telling us how difficult it is for a footballer who earns £200,000 a week. He can go to any nightclub, he can go to any restaurant, he can go to Downing Street. But because he gets abused on Twitter, that a white working class person whose life doesn't show him any benefit of his white privilege at all, but we're telling him that his life is better than that black person's life, that black footballer's life. And from a white privilege perspective, what we have to understand is, first of all, it exists. However, white privilege, the white working class doesn't benefit from his white privilege. He doesn't see it because he can't get a job, can't get a house. He lives in a council house. His kids go to a terrible school. So how can we tell him he's privileged? What we will say to him is that anything negative in your life is not because you're white. Now, that's the privilege. But that doesn't positively affect his life in any way, shape, or form. So how can we explain it to him? How we try to explain it to him is say, here's your white privilege. Every negative thing you go through. Here's a millionaire footballer who's on $200,000 a week. He can go to Downing Street. He can go to the high echelons of society. And once a week, for every now and again, a banana comes on the field. So therefore, you are luckier than him. How can he empathize with that? what we should do, if you want to explain white privilege, is say to him, you know, everything negative in your life that you go through, and you know there are a lot of negative things. The black working class go through the exact same thing, as well as having the added burden of being black. Now, even if he can't see the added burden of being black, and he says, well, they go through what I go through, then I can empathize with that. But we're trying to show them elite black people, elite women, elite gay people, and then say that, you know, in terms of sexism or homophobia, you can look at a famous woman and use her as an example of sexism, where you shouldn't. You should look at the average woman and what she goes through, or the average gay person and what they go through, to then give that example.
That's amazing, John. I mean, what I'm thinking when you're saying this, firstly, I was like, you've obviously got I suppose everyone has a complex set of pieces to their identity, but yours is a particularly interesting set when you talk about the intersection of class, immigrant status, but like a kind of a high level immigrant status because of the diplomatic component. And it's given
we weren't immigrants. My dad got posted there for 4 years. And I speak to a lot of black, particularly now Africans, because you got a lot of black millionaire Africans who are sending their children here. And we're being told, because we're black, we all have to feel blackness in the same way, that we're all disenfranchised and we're all discriminated against and our lives are terrible. And that's not the reality for a lot of us.
Yeah, I feel you. And like what I get from this is that you're talking about the complexity and the nuances that are in any individual's identity. And by highlighting and promoting certain aspects of it, or simplifying and reducing identities into patterns and blocks, it's going to create division. And I'm beginning to wonder if that is a deliberate ploy, a deliberate plan to create division, to create social division when it isn't necessary. Now, a lot of the stuff you're saying about, like, I completely agree with what you're saying about class, because one area of identity that seems to continually be excluded is
neglected.
Class. Yeah, it's neglected continually. Like, you know, just take a recent example in this country or from America, the Trump situation. People couldn't vilify white working class people quick enough. Even the most identity aware, like public opinionators and commentators getting there and say all that gammon stuff, and then their England flags outside their houses in Doncaster or Hull or Luton or Grays, where I'm from. You know, like, and I think that creates more division, more opposition, and I can't see how that's an accident, John. Like, you know, sort of working class people of any color, any religion, any sexual identity, gender identity have got more in common with one another than they have with the elites.
Absolutely, it is deliberate. It is deliberate, because we have told the white working classes the reason for your discontent are the immigrants. So therefore, in the 70s, black people are coming to take your jobs on the buses, and now they're coming to take your benefits, and they're taking your council houses. What the white working class should say is let them have the shitty benefits and shitty council houses, because we demand for ourselves. But they don't. They go, yeah, you're right. Instead of demanding more for themselves, they say, you're right. They're now taking our little shitty benefits and shitty council houses. So the overt nature of racism is perpetuated by the working classes, be they football fans. And then what happens is, after they created this division by saying, because look who's voting Tory. You know, you talk about, first of all, the people who voted UKIP were Labour voters to begin with. Then they voted UKIP. Now they vote Tory, which is crazy, because they've convinced them that the reason for their discontent and the reason for everything negative in their life is for the immigrants. Then what they do is, when we have to then cancel, sack, come down hard on someone, we then use a black elite by creating these people within institutions to then come up with, like for example, you got the Commission for Racial Disparity with Dr. Tony Sewell. So they use a black man to then come up with a report as to whether there's any racial bias. Then when he then says there is no racial bias, systemic racial bias, what, as a black person, we can't complain, because that's what we ask for. We ask for a black man to be put in that position to make the decisions. And then he says, but there are racist incidents. Now, that's interesting, because there's no systemic racism or racial bias, which means that the system, there's no systemic racism in it, but there are racial incidents. Now, what are those racial incidents? Twitter, football, all when you have a working class person doing something, therefore they are now being criticized rather than the system. So therefore, it's a deliberate ploy to divide and conquer, because what has happened is that, as you rightly say, the white working class have more in common with black people, with women, with everybody else. And when the media, for example, this is obviously from a female point of view, then put a headline saying 2 years for rape, but 5 years for throwing a statue in the river. And of course, women are going to go, there's the Black Lives Matter people again, getting more than we are getting. What about us? What about us? So they are dividing us. So, but this is an age-old point that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years that we're not aware of.
Well, did you enjoy that conversation with John Barnes? Would you consider signing up for Luminary and Under the Skin? John Barnes, I think, said some fantastic stuff about class, presented different ideas where we might come together around complex issues, but maybe I'm wrong. Why don't you tell me in the comments below what you think? Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to it, turn on the notification bell so I can continually communicate with you about this content. Subscribe to my...
So I'm going to show you something right now, and I think I'm going to show this to a lot more people, because I think this is what's going on in America. I'm saying that I'm not going to turn on my neighbor. I'm not going to blame my neighbor for the policies of the oligarchy that are keeping us poor and sick. I'm not going to blame a school bus driver because of their COVID policy that bankrupted me. I'm not going to blame a nurse's aide. I'm not going to blame a cashier. They're not your enemy. They're also victims of this oligarchy. And your democracy was stolen from you a long time ago, somewhere around 1980. So this idea that you're fighting, this idea now the Democrats have, because Democrats can't win elections anymore. Nobody would have voted for Joe Biden if they weren't faced with the threat of Nazi, white supremacist fascism and an infiltration of Russia. They had to use everything to get people to vote for Joe Biden, because Joe Biden is everything they claimed Trump was. Joe Biden is the architect of our racist criminal justice system. He bragged they put everybody in jail. They do everything but hang you for jaywalking. That's a direct quote from him. He was bragging about his bill. He's the one who made it so that people can't ever get rid of their medical debt. He's the one who did that. An enemy of people and a puppet of the credit card industry and Wall Street. He's the one who built those cages that they put the Hispanic immigrants in. Joe Biden did that. Joe Biden said he didn't want to grow up in a racial jungle. Joe Biden said that. He didn't want his kids to grow up in a racial jungle. Joe Biden said that. Joe Biden voted for the Iraq War. Joe Biden participated in not prosecuting torturers when he was supposed to. Go ahead, Kurt.
Just credit where credit is due. In those current kid cages, they are directed to call them Latinx from now on.
Okay, that'll make them feel better. Joe Biden had to drop out of running for president the first time he did it because he was a serial plagiarist. So if you're voting for him because you hate that Trump's a big liar, you just voted in a bigger liar. And a guy who has done way more to hurt black and brown people than Trump ever did. So this idea, but they have to tell themselves we're fighting white supremacy. They have to tell themselves that they're fighting Nazis. They have to tell themselves that they're trying to save democracy, which was stolen from you in 1980. By the way, the Princeton study proved that. We live in an oligarchy. What you think about policy never gets reflected unless you're in the top 10% of income earners. So there is no democracy here. If there was, we'd have a fucking living wage, a minimum wage, and we'd have health care. We don't have any of that. So this is part of it. Here's the cultural narrative that keeps us angry at each other and keeps us believing in the fantasy that there's two parties in this country. We have two right-wing parties that answer to the exact same people. Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, big pharma, tech, and the health insurance companies, and big oil. That's it. That's one party. We do not have two parties, you chump. Which is why Joe Biden promised you a $2,000 check and didn't give it to you. He promised you a public option and didn't give it to you. He promised student debt relief. He's not giving it to you. He promised a $15 minimum wage. He's not giving it to you. He's not giving you shit because he answers to the exact same people as the Republican Party does. Mitch McConnell's owners are Joe Biden's owners. So now they have to make half the country to vote for Democrats. They have to make them think their neighbors are white supremacists who want to steal their democracy from them. Every one of them are. Here it is. Two fundamental truths that the left center as a collective are failing to emotionally and intellectually accept and understand. By the way, the Democratic Party is not a left party. They're a right-wing party. And you know who said that? AOC. They're not a left wing. She said they're a right-wing party because they are. And Joe Biden wouldn't be considered a centrist in any other fucking country on earth. He'd be considered a right-wing radical, denying people health care, education, warmongering, putting kids in cages. That's what he's doing. So this is the two fundamental truths that the left center as a collective are failing to emotionally and intellectually accept and understand. One, the GOP is authoritarian and intends to end our democracy. You mean the GOP is firing people from their jobs in case they take and enforcing a medical procedure on them? That seems authoritarian. You mean the GOP is making people show their papers when they want to travel inside or outside the United States? They have to show their papers if they want to go have lunch. They have to show their papers if they want to go to a grocery. What the fuck? What could be more authoritarian than that? So this is part of this propaganda that the Democrats have to do to get you to vote for Democrats, because they got nothing to offer you. Once our democracy is dead, there's no legal way to bring it back. So this, by the way, it got 14,000 likes. That's why I'm showing you this. It got 4,000 retweets. It got 14,000 likes. This is the divisive crap that we are pushing back against at the Jimmy Dore Show. First of all, the Democratic Party is authoritarian and already ended our democracy. It's been ended. You don't live in a democracy. FYI. And I love this. It says, the whole Republican-Democrat thing is a false dichotomy and indicative of a rigged system. Even the words liberal and conservative are false paradigms. Our beliefs have nuance, so they can't neatly fit into a box. However, the powers that be would love nothing more than for us to become even more binary in our thinking, as it's easier to control us. It's by controlling the oppositions that they instigate us to fight one another instead of exposing them, ousting those who are really pulling the strings. I'm not going to be mad at an unemployed gun nut. I'm not going to be mad at an unemployed militiaman. I'm not going to be mad at a guy who is being crushed by lockdowns or losing his job because of mandates. I'm not going to be angry at that guy. I'm keeping my anger and ire for the oligarchy who is orchestrating this while funneling trillions of dollars upward to people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. In the middle of everyone else going broke, the oligarchy is creating billionaires. That's who you need to keep your ire for. That's who you need to keep your attention on. Don't be angry at your neighbor. They're not the fucking enemy. They are also victims. And if you think the Democratic Party is your savior, you are a fucking chump and a propagandist. Anything you want to add to that, Kurt?
Does it ever strike you that, the red and blue, like they use the same exact colors as the Crips and Bloods?
Yes.
Except the Crips and Bloods at least will make sure you have fair, cheap access to drugs as compared to...
That's right. And there you go. So now you know the rest of the story, and now you know what is going on in this country, because the Democrats can't win elections anymore. You think Kamala Harris can get a vote in 2024 unless they convince you she's running against the KKK and Hitler? No, that's it. That's all they got going forward. As they keep you from health care, a living wage, student debt relief, and a clean environment. As they keep you from ending the wars and investing that money back here. It's amazing. They'll mandate that you get you get a vaccine. They'll mandate you take an emergency use authorization vaccine. They'll mandate that, but they won't mandate that you get health care. They won't mandate that if you get sick that you get health care, or that if you get sick from that jab that you get health care. Like me. Hey, come see a live.
Kamala Harris went on Charlemagne the God show to talk about the Biden administration's agenda. But near the end of the interview, Charlemagne asked a question that caught the vice president completely off guard. He asked, who's the real president of this country, Joe Biden or Joe Manchin? Harris's spokesperson immediately tried to end the interview and played the old, you're breaking up trick.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me, Madam Vice President?
I'm sorry, you got it right.
Oh.
So I'm sorry to interrupt.
This exchange ended up going viral because it raised a very real point. Senator Joe Manchin, a right-wing Democrat from West Virginia, has been withholding his vote from Biden's landmark social spending bill, the Build Back Better plan. The Build Back Better plan would allocate almost $2 trillion to climate programs, schools, healthcare, but without Manchin's vote, the Democrats would only have 49 votes, one shy of passing the bill in the Senate. Manchin has been using his vote to extract concessions. For example, Manchin opposed the bill saying it was too large. So the Biden administration cut its size from $3.5 trillion to $1.7 trillion. Manchin said the Democrats had to choose the programs they wanted to prioritize. So the Biden administration cut vision and dental care for seniors and slashed the budgets of several proposed programs. Joe Biden has been meeting regularly with Joe Manchin, even inviting Manchin to his personal home to try to win him over. Yet despite all of the meetings and all of that compromise, last Sunday, Joe Manchin went on Fox News and said that he would not be supporting the Build Back Better bill, effectively killing the plan right there on the spot. So going back to Charlemagne's original question, Kamala Harris got all offended that Charlemagne would ask if Joe Manchin was the one really running the country, but yeah, that's how most of us see it. And this is the exact problem with the Democrats. They tell us they're the party of the working class, that they fight for average people against the interests of corporations and billionaires. But when they actually have to fight someone who represents corporations and billionaires, like Joe Manchin, they collapse like a house of cards. And for all those saying, well, what's Joe Biden supposed to do? It's simple. You're the president of the United States. Go on TV and expose Joe Manchin. Tell them that Joe Manchin is a puppet for the coal, gas, and oil industry. Tell them that he's received more donations from these industries than any other U.S. senator. Tell them that Joe Manchin represents one of the poorest states in the country and that he's choosing to forward the interests of his corporate donors rather than the interests of his constituents who would be lifted out of poverty by this bill. Call on any one of the 81 million people that voted for you to apply pressure on Joe Manchin. Of course, Joe Biden had a million chances to do these things, but he didn't. Because at the end of the day, Joe Biden is on the side of corporations too. If the Democrats couldn't defend a bill that's supported by the vast majority of Americans, it's clear that they're not fighting for the vast majority of Americans. And if that's the case, we need a party that will. It's that simple.
Tuesday, we have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Crystal?
Indeed, we do. Previewing President Biden's big Omicron address. We're getting a few details this morning about exactly what he is doing, what his plans are, as Omicron has now really quickly become the dominant strain in America, actually much more quickly even than scientists had predicted. So we'll give you all of those details. Also, surprise, surprise, former President Trump saying something actually really useful and genuinely
very good.
We'll tell you about that. Some interesting labor horseshoe politics with Marco Rubio and Sherrod Brown pushing back on Amazon, writing a joint letter to Marty Walsh, who's the labor secretary, about Amazon's abusive labor practices. Louis C.K., he was already kind of back.
Yeah.
In
the underground.
Yeah, he had done shows. Now, though, he is out with his first special since all of his horrific behavior was revealed. There's been a big conversation, big discourse on that. We're also talking today to the wife of one of the miners who is on strike down in Alabama. That's with Warrior Met Coal. They've been trying to get back to what their wages were in 2016.
That's right.
In the process, they've taken on not only the coal company itself, but the coal company is mostly backed at this point by BlackRock. So they've taken these extraordinary trips up to New York City, all of these miners and their supporters protesting out front of the BlackRock headquarters, which has been incredible to see. We're going to talk to Hayden today. We also have told you guys that, as part of us trying to give back during the holiday season, we decided here at Breaking Points to contribute $25,000 to their strike fund. They have been out of work for so long. They have bills piling up, holiday season, all of that stuff. And, we're encouraging you guys, if you're able, to also give to that strike fund. We're going to have the link in the description.
That's right. We'll have links in the description to everything that we talk about today.
But we wanted to start with the continued fallout over Joe Manchin killing the Build Back Better bill. One of the big questions, and a lot of finger pointing going on here, but one of the big questions is, number one, why did progressives, outside of a few lonely voices, why did they go along with the Biden administration's assurances, promises that the corporatists in the party would all be on board? Clearly, that was incorrect. Clearly, that was a lie. And then also, Jen Psaki getting pushed from a reporter yesterday about, hey, what are you going to say to progressives who did trust you guys and ended up getting really burned? Let's take a listen to that.
What would be his message to progressives who he asked to hang with him as things moved over to the Senate, now that what many of them warned has happened?
Well, I would say, one, his message would be, we need to work together to get this done, and he's going to work like hell to get it done. And that would be his message, and January is an opportunity to do exactly that.
January.
Yeah,
great
stop pretending
opportunity.
like this is going to happen, Cyber.
Yeah.
And I did see a lot of takes yesterday that were like, maybe it's not really dead. Do you think there's any chance that any of this could be resurrected?
No, absolutely not. I mean, look, didn't you say, and we have this Manchin, let's put this up there on the screen. He explained actually in that interview yesterday in a West Virginia radio station where he was like, basically said that from the very beginning, he knew exactly where he was and that he probably wasn't going to vote for it, period.
So the quote he has here, this is Hoppy Kercheval's big deal in West Virginia radio. He's sort of like, the lion of West Virginia radio, political radio or whatever. Anyway, Manchin said to him, I think I made it very clear at that time, which is like right after the COVID relief, I won't continue to do major policy changes through reconciliation. It needs to go through a process. So if you were never going to do reconciliation from the beginning, which I remember him saying at the time, and was being like, well, this isn't going to happen.
Right.
If you were never even down with the process that this was all going through, like, what have we been doing here? But also, I mean, it's extraordinarily disingenuous for him because clearly he engaged enough to get the pieces of it that he wanted through and then played and strung everyone along until he could come up with enough excuses to ultimately kill the piece that he didn't want and that the business community didn't want.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of liars that were involved here. But I mean, Manchin, certainly. Cinema, I also want to say one thing that really annoyed me about that interview is that Manchin said that one of the reasons why he didn't like the bill was that because it did not do enough to address prescription drug prices. Now, we may all recall his counterpart, Kyrsten Sinema, is the one who actually killed all of the prescription drug parts of the bill. And speaking with some people around this, a deep part of the frustration is Manchin is like, look, I want this thing to be deficit neutral. And Sinema, his counterpart, is like, and also you're not going to raise taxes on anyone or anything.
That's a great
It's
point.
not possible to have a deficit neutral bill if you can't raise taxes on anything. It's not possible to lower prescription drug prices if you're not allowed to negotiate as Medicare and lower the price for everybody who's old. So they're actually, in two different and opposite ways, equally pernicious forces killing it.
That's actually a great point because he even talked in that interview with Hoppy about one thing I was interested in was tax reform to tax like the wealthiest people and corporations. And of course, he's not going to be where I am on taxation. But then you had Sinema
who's like
killing
no
that
taxes,
piece.
period.
It's almost like they were working together to make sure that it was impossible for this thing ultimately to happen. So that's, one set of liars. Then you had the progressives, Pramila Jayapal, who's the leader of the Progressive Caucus. I mean, I don't know if they were lying to us or they were lying to themselves, but anyone with a brain could see what direction this was ultimately going in, could see that they were giving up their leverage when they agreed to go along with the Josh Gottheimer, Joe Manchin, Nancy Pelosi plan of voting through the infrastructure and then hoping and praying that everybody got on board with Build Back Better. The very latest from Pramila Jayapal, let's put this up on the screen, this tweet from Aida Chavez. She says, it's abundantly clear that Manchin can't be trusted. Oh, really? Oh my gosh. Wow, you are so insightful to finally realize that. And you will remember that I have not said anything against him all these months because I believed he was negotiating in good faith. I do not know why you ever would have thought that. Next tweet up on the screen. She also says she does not regret decoupling the bipartisan infrastructure bill from the Build Back Better package, which was in fact the death knell, the beginning of the end for this whole thing. She says, quote, had we not passed the infrastructure bill, that would have been the day that the senator said BBB is done. We would have still ended up in the same place. If that's the case, that would actually be a better situation.
Yeah.
If they killed it then, rather than dragging this all out for months,
Wasting all
and
of our
everybody
time
messing
for
around
6
and
months.
exactly wasting all of our time, all of these months, when hey, maybe they could have moved on to something else. Maybe they could have considered executive orders to do. Maybe something else could have happened. So it is an astonishing justification here of what ended up being a completely foolish move on the part of progressives that they effectively, you know, I keep saying it, after Virginia and the loss there, the media started to turn their blame on the progressives and say, why are you guys holding up, getting something through?
Yeah, as if the bill had anything to do with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Had nothing to do with the fact that, you know, Terry McAuliffe's campaign went down in flames. But after 2 days of feeling a tiny bit of heat from the media, they completely collapsed. Pathetic.
It's a total joke. And I just do think it really reveals the utter emptiness of a lot of the political movements that we have right now in the country. I mean, you know, we covered literally on the right, the only litmus test that exists right now is whether you agree with Trump on whether the election was stolen by Venezuelan dominions and bamboo ballots. Then in the centrist kind of Biden position, I'm not entirely sure what their ideology is, but they felt affirmed because they won the White House. But then obviously we know that when you combine that with an 80-something-year-old man who inspires zero confidence, combined with a massive supply chain crisis, which is leading to inflation, combined with, you know, skyrocketing Omicron and the inability to like take control of all of that, you have rock bottom approval rating. The other side of that, and with the progressive left kind of painting themselves as the ones who are principled and the ones who are really going to push things in a different direction and having their commitment to the principle and their commitment to action with a razor-thin minority within the House of Representatives, all of that ultimately collapsed. So I do actually think it's very sad, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this. The one floated yesterday that we wanted to make sure we put in the show. Let's put it up there from Alex Thompson, which is that progressive anger building with some entertaining even a Biden 24 primary challenge. Bernie ally Nina Turner, quote, I think the movement is going to cry out for that. We played nice in 2021. What did we get for it? Would she do it? She declined to comment. I mean, look, we'll see. I don't know if Nina Turner would even be necessarily the best person. Crystal, you had said in the past that Bernie, you know, obviously had considered running against Obama in 2012, just in order to try and push him in the right direction. Who would be the right person? Would this even work? I mean, could it turn into a media joke? Like, what is it?
I mean, I don't know who the right person would be. Obviously, I'm personally extremely biased in favor of Nina Turner. But the idea of a primary challenge in 2024, I mean, I don't think that's a bad one at all. Number one, we don't know that Joe Biden is running again. So very good point, the DC political class has already turned on Kamala Harris. So I thought, and I still think she'll be very difficult to, you know, remove as the next in line, especially, I mean, she's the vice president. You have to contend with people saying, why are you going against the black woman? All of that. So I do think that that will be difficult. But especially if Biden doesn't run again, that field's going to be relatively wide open. I mean, you might have other people jump in the race, Pete Buttigieg and others.
It would be a total, like, open, just like 2016.
Right. And so, you know, in that sense, you're sort of protected a little bit from that narrative of like, how dare you try to supplant this, you know, historic black woman. And so, yeah, I absolutely think progressives should 100% be thinking about that. Even if you're not able to win, you can put pressure on the people who are in office now, on Joe Biden right now, and you can put pressure on whoever the eventual nominee ends up being. And, you know, ultimately, if things go well, you got a shot at being the nominee and being the president. So to me, that's all, you know, all to the better and a risk worth taking. I personally, you know, there's all these voices during primaries, we can't have a divisive primary. And I think that is all total
How did
nonsense.
that work out for you?
There has never been a more divisive primary than either Obama and Hillary.
Yeah.
I mean, that was
likable enough.
Nasty. Yeah. But then the 2016 Republican primary, I mean, that thing was a raucous brawl, and Trump still managed to win the White House. So I'm not afraid of a little, you know, mixing it up and a little actual democracy in the primary, which is where, you know, in terms of actually achieving power and being able to to achieve your political objectives, that's actually where a lot of the action happens. So listen, I'm beyond open to it. Who the right candidate is, I think we'll see how things shake up out over the next couple of years.
It's really going to be interesting. I mean, the takeaway from this is that what you are seeing is the utter collapse of the Biden agenda, perhaps even of the presidency. I mean, it's just gotten such to a low level. Look, theoretically and historically, yes, there are presidents who have pulled it out and have been able to run again. But given his age, given his just general inability to rise to the moment, letting the crises and the country kind of sweep him by so quickly, a primary challenge could also push him to try and maybe do better while he was president. So really, it's like, who knows?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
The other thing I do want to say is I think Democrats are beyond doomed for the midterms.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be a bloodbath. I think 2024 is still totally up in the air.
I think that's true.
Because there is a set of circumstances in which, through no real action of Joe Biden, the pandemic gets under control, people are feeling better, the economy, the kinks are worked out in terms of the supply chain, and inflation gets under control, and people are feeling a lot more optimistic about their personal circumstances. And in that instance, especially if Biden does run again, look, it's very hard to unseat an incumbent president, especially if things are sort of generally going well in the country. And it is possible that that is what the landscape will look like in 2024.
Totally could be. Very plausible. It really all depends on COVID, on whether we're going to have restrictions, which I'll be talking about in my monologue. So, yeah, I think that's where it just depends.
One last piece on this, because this really, really pissed me off. Another reason why Joe Manchin decided to tank Build Back Better was apparently his opposition to the child tax credit, which is kind of wild because there are a lot of conservatives who support the child tax credit, including Mitt Romney, whose plan is actually more generous than what the Democrats were offering.
He put out a tweet yesterday, actually.
Yeah, he did.
He's like, let's work together,
do it.
Biden.
All right, we'll see.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's put this Huffington Post information up on the screen. So Manchin reportedly privately told colleagues he didn't like the child tax credit because parents use the money on drugs. This is such a condescending, classist attitude, especially coming from the senator of one of the poorest states in the nation, which shows you just what contempt he has for his own constituents. And let me also say that we've covered the studies on universal basic income, which are very analogous here, where people are getting, they're getting a monthly check. The conservative sort of, and there are, by the way, there are a lot of people on the right who support universal basic income, just like there are a lot of people on the right who support a child tax credit. The obviously conservative caricature of that position is like a welfare queen thing, like, they're just going to use it for drugs and alcohol, et cetera. None of the research shows that whatsoever. What people overwhelmingly use the extra money for are things that better themselves and their families' situation. And especially with the child tax credit, what they have found is that just because it has the label child on it, people really genuinely tend to use the money to benefit their kids, whether it's enrichment activities or sports or a better schooling situation, whatever it is, they do genuinely tend to use the money to benefit their children. So not only is this like a condescending classist attitude, it is also belied and debunked by every relevant study that we have seen in this regard.
There you go.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut.
We have a very interesting story, Kurt, about an acquaintance / friend of mine, Sarah Silverman.
Yeah, I know Sarah Silverman.
Now, I have to tell people, I'm not going to rip Sarah Silverman. She was very nice to me when I did the Jimmy Kimmel show, when she didn't have to be. Put it that way. She went out of her way.
Nice.
She went out of her way to be nice and accommodating, and she didn't have to do any of that. I mean, she went above and beyond. So, and I've known her since pretty much since I got to town. I don't think I've seen her in the last 10 years because, anyway, but, I just want to say that. So this story involves her, but first I'm going to show you this story, right? Because it leads into it. So Governor DeSantis in Florida, he proposed a new civilian military force in Florida that he would control. That's the headline at CNN. But if you read the article, It says he's going to reestablish the World War II era civilian military force that he, not the Pentagon, would control. DeSantis pitched the idea Thursday as a way to further support the Florida National Guard during emergencies like hurricanes. The Florida National Guard has also played a vital role during the pandemic in administering COVID-19 tests and distributing vaccines. So he wants to bulk up that service. In a nod to the growing tension between Republican states and the Biden administration over the National Guard, DeSantis also said this unit, called the Florida State Guard, would be not encumbered by the federal government. He said this force would give him the flexibility and the ability needed to respond to events in our state in the most effective way possible. If Florida moves ahead with DeSantis' plan to reestablish the civilian force, it would become the 23rd active state guard in the country. So there's 22 other states currently doing exactly what DeSantis is proposing. DeSantis' office said in a press release, joining California, Texas, and New York also have this thing he's proposing. These guards are little-known auxiliary forces with origins dating back to the advent of state militias in the 18th century. So here's where it starts to get involving Sarah Silver person. I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to offend anybody. So Joy-Ann Reid tweets this article out that you and I just read together about DeSantis doing something completely normal that 22 other states currently do, including New York and California, two of the bluest states in the country. So she tweets this article out and she says, so, ... y'all know this is fascisty bananas, right? Fascisty bananas, which is, by the way, name of my old punk band in college, Fascisty Bananas. Sure, Fascisty Bananas is kind of clunky as an insult, but Joy isn't allowed to... Oh, I can't say that joke.
Oh, really?
So close.
She got hacked.
Yeah, well, yes. I don't, you know what? I would probably get away with it, but, I would be correct to get away with it, but I don't need the fucking headache. It's a joke referencing that she used to be homophobic and use gay as a slur, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you'd think I'd be able to say that joke.
You could say that. That's literally what the joke was.
I know.
Gay as a slur.
Yes. So she uses feisty bananas. It's clunky as an insult, but Joy isn't allowed to use gay as a slur anymore. That's the joke.
Hey,
I could do that joke.
That's what she would do.
Because that's what she would do, yes.
She had to give it up, and now she's got to come up with original material because she can't just say gay things anymore.
Yes. And so she did that. She called it fascisty. So she's saying because that's the understand. So I've been saying this on this show. And so what this is, what the Democrat and the media have done, what the Democrats and the media have done, is they can't win elections anymore because they're not offering anything to the people. So they have to demonize their opponents at every turn. And so they're now running on a narrative that half the country are white supremacists, fascists, and Nazis. That's it. So if you're not a Democrat, you're a white supremacist and a fascist and a Nazi, and that's it. And you're never going to be, and you'll never get in trouble for doing that. What's that, Kurt?
And also a vector of disease.
Yes, right. Yes. You're right. So I just want to show you how many that got 4,500 retweets and 17,700 likes. And if you read the article, you know that this is propaganda from Joy-Ann Reid because the article says he's doing something completely reasonable. Governor of Florida is doing something completely reasonable, even though he's a Republican. He's doing something completely reasonable that 22 other states, including New York and California, the state she lives in, actually does the same thing. So Sarah Silverperson got upset at that. She didn't get upset. She just, well, whatever. She called it out. She goes, please read the article before you post this stuff. You're a news outlet. The truth has to matter. Well, I would like to think that the truth has to matter, but Sarah, since when has the truth actually mattered? What the hell kind of a Democrat are you, Sarah? You know the truth doesn't matter. They just did Russiagate for 5 years. They said Bernie was working with the Russians. Truth never matters to Democrats. Okay, so she's asking for truth from the Democrats, and all I have to say is you brought this on yourself. Because Joyanne Reed said, "Hi, Sarah. Thanks, I did read it. That's why we did the segment tonight with Nikki Fried and Amanda on air. Here's another great read on what Ron DeSantis is doing and why it's worrisome to anyone who cares about democracy." So again, the people that their political opponents aren't just Republicans. They're the enemies of democracy. They're fascists. They're white supremacists. They're Nazis. Do you see this? What's going on? And this is coming from MSNBC. This is the Democratic narrative now because they can't win elections anymore. So they have to completely demonize not only their political opponents, but half the country. That's what this is. So she did read it, Sarah. What she's telling you is that she's a professional fucking liar, Sarah. Do you not know that about Joyanne Reed? Of course you don't. Because she doesn't really pay close attention to the stuff. And as soon as someone like Sarah Silverperson does pay close attention, they get outraged. Like, holy shit, Joyanne Reed is lying about this article. Why the fuck would she do that? That doesn't help. As soon as she looks into it, she sees that the people who are on her side are complete fucking lying bullshitters. Because that's what Joyanne Reed just admitted. I did read the article, so I knew it wasn't fascisty bananas, but I said it was anyway. Do you understand? Do you see now? Joyanne Reed's lying, Sarah, and she fucking knows it. And I appreciate your attempt to try to hold her feet to the fire one time. It would be nice if you went back after that and said, then why are you lying? Why are you misleading everybody on Twitter if you read the article? Well, other people came at Sarah and said, why did you assume she didn't read the article? Black people do read articles before.
Oh, no.
Yep. That's where they went. Black people do read articles before posting, dear. Especially an accomplished black female journalist who the disgust is on her show. What's wrong with you? Racist. That's what they said.
You think that's fake? You think that's I feel like that's like K-Hive nonsense, you know? Like those people supposedly love Kamala Harris and attack anyone. That seems so fake.
You would think it's fake, Kurt. Yeah. Yes, you would think that's got to be fake. I see stuff like that that's been real for the last 5 years. So I don't doubt that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Here's another one. It says, I can't believe she went after a prominent black woman.
Wow.
Racist Sarah Silverman attacks black journalists in ways she would never attack a white woman in multiple tweets.
What?
I don't know what to even say to that. I don't know. I can't believe it either. We all know that if someone is prominent, they are above reproach. She just asked her to read the article and stop scaremongering people. Stop pushing propaganda. That's all she did. Joyanne Reed said she did read the article, which means she's worse than that. She's a liar. And that's the Democrat flex. And now Sarah Silverman knows what it feels like to break out of the cult. As soon as you say something about the cult, that's what happens. You get excommunicated and called a racist. Just like that. That's it. It's a cult, Sarah. The Democratic Party is a cult, and facts don't matter. Truth doesn't matter. Just like the Republican Party, by the way. They're not different. They're all serving the same masters. And this idea that voting for a racist, maniac, enemy of the people like Joe Biden, who's also a sex harasser, somehow is better than Donald Trump or anyone else. Joe Biden's a war criminal. He's a torturer. He's the worst things you could be he built those cages that they were putting kids in and still are. He made it so you can't get rid of your student loan debt or your medical debt. He's the enemy of workers. He's the architect of our racist prison system for profit. So the idea that voting for Joe Biden was a vote against racism or white supremacy is a joke. And if you looked into it, you would know that. Just like if you looked into Joanne Reed, you would know she's a lying, pathological lying, propagandist, smear merchant, homophobe, who also is a slanderer of gay people and then lies about it. That's who she is. So what happened then was Sunny from The View chimed in. She said, the hubris to think you can accuse a Harvard-educated woman of not reading. Do you see what happened, Sarah? Not welcome to my world. Welcome to my... She had the most innocuous critique of somebody who's a Democrat. And that is off limits, Sarah. You are not allowed to do that in the Democratic cult. And if you do it, you're immediately called a racist. Or someone accusing a Harvard-educated woman of not reading. What the F? What is... You can't do that. She's a prominent person. That would be like asking Oprah about the sex abuse that was done at the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy. You just can't bring that stuff up. Sarah Silverman, whether you realize it or not, you are just as bad as those hackers who inserted homophobic comments into Joy's old blogs. Again, Sarah Silver person, very nice person, and here she is to respond to this. What? Look at the chagrin. She can't believe what's happening. It's been happening to me since I wouldn't vote for Hillary. Since I wouldn't reward the people who cheated Bernie Sanders. And we were disrupting the 2016 convention, and Sarah Silverman said the people who were upset that Bernie was cheated by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign, which it's a fact. That's why people had to step down from the DNC and Hillary's campaign. That's why. She said that when we were disrupting this and booing and making our unhappiness known to the establishment, that we were being ridiculous. She told the people in the crowd as they were turning sound cannons on them, turning the lights off on them, hiding them and their signs from the cameras at a convention. She said that those people were being ridiculous, which a lot of people took hard. So, and then she never went on to criticize the Democrats. She didn't. That was it. After Bernie dropped out, that's it. And so now but I didn't stop. I kept reminding people that we have two right-wing parties in this country, and that you're a chump if you think voting for Joe Biden is an answer to anything except more misery for this country, which is what it is. And, well, here she is. Here she's going to respond.
Own side. We can't even critique anyone in your own party without punishment. One of the hosts of The View was like, what hubris for Sarah Silverman to accuse a black woman of not reading. Oi, Jesus H, what the... I surrender. Good grief. I don't want any trouble. I cannot believe I need...
So I don't want any trouble either, Sarah, but I'm not going to bite my tongue over it. And so I tell the truth. And when I see people like Joanne Reed blatantly lying, trying to divide our country in such a disgusting way, or I see people like Chris Hayes or Rachel Maddow propagandizing at the top of their lungs about no matter what it is, I'm going to call it out. And it has more of a sting because I'm supposed to be on their side. That's why it's actually more effective. So I actually am supposed to have the same viewpoints as them. So I understand why she's afraid now, because she's like, I just want to have a show business career and I don't need this shit. Well, me too, but I'm going to keep sticking my chin out to tell the truth, because what the fuck is the point of life anyway? Yeah, I'm taking a lot of shit. I have taken a lot of shit since 2015 when I wouldn't reward the people who cheated Bernie Sanders. Ever since then, I've been persona non grata and called every fucking name in the book white supremacist. I've been called a Nazi. I've been called a Republican. I've been called a Trumper. I've been called a grifter. Now I'm being called anti-vax because I'm sticking up for workers, and I'm repeating the same things Anthony Fauci said last year, which is you can't force someone and mandates are wrong. But they're calling me an anti-vaxxer for that. So now just a little, see what happens, Sarah? You just step 1 inch, 1 hair outside of the cult narrative and you're going to be called a racist. 1 hair. Let's watch her again say that.
On side. We can't even critique anyone in your own party without punishment. One of the hosts of The View was like, what hubris for Sarah Silverman to accuse a black woman of not reading. Oi, Jesus H, what the... I surrender. Good grief. I don't want any trouble. I cannot believe I need to say this, but I did not criticize Joy Ann because she's black, but because she's a Harvard-educated journalist with the responsibility, ideally, of showing the whole picture and not just a piece of a picture.
I feel your pain, Sarah. That's been the story of my life for the last 5 years. Hey, no, I just want people to see the whole picture. No, you're a racist, Trumper, grifter, anti-vaxxer. Now, hopefully you'll have a little bit more sympathy for someone in my position. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows?
Well, Jimmy.
But again, I want to. The reason why this is interesting is because Sarah Silverperson is a good person. I like Sarah Silverman, and I think her heart is always in the right place. But she's again a Democrat. And when you are at this since 2016, if you're a Democrat, you're in a cult. It's a cult, and you just felt the repercussions from stepping out. That's what happens when you fucking criticize a cult. That's not what happens when you criticize a news person who nobody trusts in the fucking world anyway. A corporate paid, pharma funded news person you can't criticize? That's a cult. You're in a fucking cult, and no, the facts don't matter. And they're going to propagandize you, Sarah, into pretending the people who don't vote for Democrats are white supremacists, Nazis, and fascists. There's no gray area. Even though Joe Biden, when he was running for office, he was running on the premise he could work with those people. I'll get things done. I know how to work with these people. You mean he's going to work with fascists and white supremacists? Do you see the knot you tie yourself in when you go down this road? So I've been pushing back against that bullshit Democratic Party narrative, and I've been catching that for fucking 5 years straight. And so I don't like to see Sarah Silverman be unfairly attacked, but it does make me feel a little better at the same time. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm like, oh, just like when they went after Trevor Noah. So Trevor Noah made an obvious observation and joke about the CEO of Moderna, and they called him anti-vax. She makes an obvious critique of Joy Ann Reid, and they call her racist. And they attack her.
Well,
so the more that this happens, the more it will become obvious to people that it's a fucking cult. So that's the part that I think is good. It's everything else is bad, and I'm not happy about what happened to Sarah Silverman. That's not what I'm saying. Here's how it was reported. Breitbart, Sarah Silverman. By the way, can I just point out, here's the interesting thing. So she says that the woman from The View, Sunny, said, how dare you criticize a black woman? That's not what Sunny said. Here's what Sunny said. Sunny said, the hubris to think you can accuse a Harvard-educated woman of not reading. So the irony there is that Sarah misread that tweet. So she was conflating these tweets with this tweet. And so Sonny didn't actually attack her because of that. She just attacked her for criticizing Joy-Ann Reid. That's it. You're not supposed to do that.
Jimmy.
What?
I have a question. Like the hubris of questioning a Harvard-educated woman if she didn't read. Since when is that a crime? I question Harvard now that I know Joy-Ann Reid went there.
Yeah, I know.
Like, I think less of Harvard, I have to say, in a major way.
So that's the irony there. So Sarah actually is conflating tweets, but I get why she's doing that. That's got to be horrible. You just make an obvious tweet and then people start attacking you as racist in public. I know. I know what that feels like. Let's listen to it one more time.
Own side. We can't even critique anyone in your own party without punishment. One of the hosts of The View was like, what hubris for Sarah Silverman to accuse a black woman of not reading. Oi, Jesus H, what the?
Oh.
I surrender. Good grief. I don't want any trouble. I cannot believe I need to say this, but I did not criticize Joy-Ann because she's black, but because she's a Harvard-educated journalist with the responsibility, ideally, of showing the whole picture and not just a piece of a picture.
It is hubris to think that you're going to clear something up on Twitter. That is a form of hubris. Whoa, I'll fix this.
Yeah, I don't. You're not allowed to criticize anybody who's seen as fighting against the white supremacists. That's just there's two. That's it. They want everybody split against each other in this country because the oligarchs can't win elections anymore. And if they lose the mirage of a two-party system, people will actually revolt. If they lose, because it's a mirage. There is not a two-party system. Look what the fuck is going on right now. They just transferred $5 trillion to the richest people in the country. They just bloated the military budget up again. It's almost at $800 billion a year. Nobody wants it. And they're denying a minimum wage and health care. Still, the people you voted for are still denying people health care. No other country's doing that. You don't think that's fascist? What is that? What is that called? That's fascism, because that's the government in collusion with big pharma and the health insurance companies coming together not to help you, but to screw you. That is the definition of fascism. Here's Breitbart said Sarah Silverman dragged as racist for correcting Joy Reid. I did not criticize Joy-Ann Reid because she's black.
Look at the picture. Jesus.
They covered it. Sarah Silverman called racist for Sarah Silverman accused of racism for attacking Joy Reid. I did not criticize her because she's black. Guess who supported her? Stephen L. Miller. Ooh, that's got to be tough. Dragger queen, Stephen L. Miller says, and he got 2,444 likes. I mean, Sarah's tweet did very well. It's got 9,000 likes, so she was onto something. And so that's why they had to beat her down as fast as possible. Sarah Silverman said, not loving being co-opted by the right. That she's referring to this. As a liberal, I care about the truth and point it out wherever it belongs. Unlike the Democratic Party or the establishment news people. I like Joy-Ann Reid. Why, we'll never know. I think she's saying she likes Joy-Ann Reid because I don't want to be called a racist anymore.
I want to sit at the cool table still.
Yes, God forbid. I don't want to be out of the cult. Here, let's get back to her. She said, I like Joy-Ann Reid. I do not care for DeSantis' politics. I find his purely political anti-vax stance is just that. Again, that's not what the article was about. It wasn't about anything. But she has to do that because she's out of the cult.
Don't take me.
Yes,
take him.
That's right. She has to do that. And as a liberal, I care about the truth, unless it was hacked from Hillary Clinton's hard drive before her interns got a chance to destroy it. Okay.
We have no right to see that.
And so now here's Twitchy's team. I don't know what this is, Twitchy team.
I think that's Glenn Beck's.
Oh, poor thing. Sarah Silverman doesn't like the taste of her own lefty medicine after lefties paint her as a racist for calling out Joy-Ann Reid. Oh, that's what she also meant. Why she didn't want to, not loving being co-opted by the right. Yeah. So, so that's what she said. The hubris to think you can accuse a Harvard. She didn't say black, but other people did, and you can totally understand why Sarah made that mistake. And it's not like Joy-Ann Reid. This is her thing. Joy-Ann Reid accuses Elon Musk of racism. Joy-Ann Reid accuses opponent pushing for debate of making white man demands. By the way, this is from CNN. The proposal from DeSantis comes on the heels of Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's directive warning that National Guard members who refuse to get vaccinated against the coronavirus will have their pay withheld and be barred from training. Does that sound fascist? Which is fascist? He's creating another civilian National Guard, or the government is going to take people's pay away unless they take a medical treatment, a medical procedure. Which one of those things sounds fascisty bananas to you? You're going to fire someone, coerce them into taking a medical treatment. I don't know. I thought we figured this out at the Nuremberg trials. I thought we did. I thought the Nuremberg Code took care of all this. Do you see how fast it happens? Boom. And now you don't have the freedom to travel anywhere in America. You don't have the freedom of speech. You don't have freedom of anything. It happens just like that. And we're in it. We're in it now. So we'll see if people push back. Anything you like to say about that? Again, this is
You know who Joy-Ann Reid reminds me of? Did you ever see that movie V for Vendetta?
Yes.
Like the propaganda. It is really disturbing she went to Harvard because she's consciously making these lies.
Yes.
And probably thinks of it like a game, like, you got to play the game and do it. Like her response to Sarah, because Sarah didn't have hubris, assuming the best that she merely didn't read it, instead of that she's a liar. She used it as a chance to promote the show. Hey, Sarah, that's great. Check out the show where we talk about it. Yeah. That was Joy's response. The other people were offended on her behalf.
Yeah.
She was like, ooh, a celeb. We're getting the
so Joy-Ann Reid is a coward and a bully. That's what bullies are. They're cowards. So Joy-Ann Reid does whatever her mob likes at the moment. Whoever she can beat up on, whatever gets a retweet. So like back in the late 08, 09, it was cool to smear gay people and say horrible things about gay people and Muslims. And so she did that. She did say horrible things about gay people, and because that was rewarded by her mob. She wrote it on her blog. She didn't write it in a text to a friend. She did it to get hit clicks and views.
Right.
And so now that's not accepted anymore. And she's got a job on virtue signaling MSNBC. So what kind of horrible shit is... You could call anybody you don't like your political opponents. You can call them white supremacists and fascists, which is another form of crazy bullying. That's just whatever horrible thing. And that's why her fans started immediately calling Sarah a racist, because that's the kind of things they do. That's what bullies do when confronted. They do an underhanded smear instead of actually talking to the point that Sarah Silverman was making. Was that how could you read that article and then tweet out that he's being a fascist? And that she's shocked that news people on MSNBC are fucking liars and propagandists. That's funny. And why she likes Joy-Ann Reid, we'll never know. But go ahead.
That's way beyond. I like your saying about how they're like adult children of alcoholics.
Yes.
They're like loyal. But I think it's getting worse than that. Now they are like Dottie Sandusky to me.
Yeah. Yes.
Dottie doesn't go in the basement. That level of not wanting to know is, you're talking to Max about it. I told you, a friend of mine said, I don't need to see footage. I've had somebody literally tell me they don't need to see evidence of things.
Right. I don't need to be informed on the facts of the story I'm talking about. I know how I emotionally feel. That's where we're at. And there are half the country is white supremacists, half the country's Nazis, and half the country should be whatever. I don't know, starved, and I don't know what they want to do with them. But it's this pretend we're saving democracy. Let me tell you something. Your democracy was taken from you a long time ago, you fucking chump. And if you think Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are going to give you democracy, you're a chump. You're a chump. Hey, come see a live stand-up show. We're doing New Year's Eve in Studio City. In January, we'll be in Raleigh, North Carolina. In February, we're going to be in Philadelphia. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all our tickets.
that actually like are more ethical, and they might not support social programs, or they might have some ideas about how the free market economy is better.